The school bell rang, signaling the start of another ordinary day, but for Sarah, it was anything but. She stood frozen in the doorway of the classroom, her heart hammering in her chest. The usual rush of students, chattering as they made their way to their seats, felt distant. The eyes of her classmates locked on her, some out of curiosity, others out of sympathy, but most with a mix of disbelief and judgment. It was the kind of attention she'd grown used to, but today, it felt heavier than usual. She adjusted her eye patch as she stepped forward, trying to hold her head high. It was always the same. A few seconds of silence followed by the hushed whispers. It wasn't that she cared what they thought, she'd learned long ago how to shut out the noise. But it still stung, the unspoken questions hanging in the air like a thick fog. Why was she different? Why did she wear the eye patch? Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack as she walked to her desk in the middle of the room. It felt like all eyes were still on her, even as she sat down. She opened her books, trying to focus on the lesson, but her thoughts refused to follow the path of the teacher's voice. Instead, they wandered back to that day, the day everything changed. The day her life went from ordinary to a story no one could ever believe. The teacher began talking, but her words were drowned out by the sound of Sarah's heart in her ears. The other students were taking notes, their pens scratching across paper, their minds elsewhere. But Sarah was locked in the memories that played like a film inside her mind. It was hard not to think about it, not when the pain and the fear were still so raw, so close to the surface. What had happened? What had caused her to wear the eye patch? It wasn't just an accident, not the kind people assumed. It wasn't just some random event that she could forget. It was something that had happened to her. Something so shocking, so life-altering, that she still had trouble accepting it. And every time someone asked about her eye patch, she felt a pit form in her stomach, because it meant reliving a nightmare she couldn't escape. The eyes. The fear in their gazes. She could feel it all around her now. She had been living this life for years, and yet, no one had ever truly understood why she wore the eye patch. No one had dared to ask the right questions. They didn't know. They couldn't. She tried to shake off the thoughts, but they clung to her, like a heavy blanket. She focused on the teacher's voice, but it was no use. The lesson was nothing but background noise now. It was the day of the accident. It had started like any other day, an ordinary afternoon, bright and warm. She was on her way home from school, walking along the same quiet street she always did. The sun had just started to set, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Her thoughts had been on what she would do once she got home, finish her homework, maybe grab a snack. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing that suggested her life was about to change forever. But then, without warning, everything had gone black. The sound of screeching tires had pierced the air. A blur of metal, rubber, and panic had surrounded her. She had barely seen the car coming before it hit her. It happened so fast. One moment, she was walking, and the next, she was thrown to the ground with a force that felt like it could tear her apart. She remembered the pain, the sharp, burning sensation that spread across her body. She remembered the screams, but not from her own mouth. The world had gone silent after that, and all she could hear was her own breath, ragged and shallow. And then the darkness. When she woke up, everything was different. She was in a hospital room, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily, their sound a constant reminder that she was alive. But that didn't comfort her. The first thing she noticed was the bandages wrapped around her head, and the overwhelming pressure on her right eye. A doctor had stood beside her bed, his face pale and serious. She could tell that something was terribly wrong, but no one had prepared her for the truth. Her eye was gone. The impact had crushed it, beyond repair. She would never see out of it again. The doctor spoke in a soft, comforting tone, but the words he said didn't make sense. He explained how they had done everything they could, how they had saved her life, but the damage to her eye was irreversible. She could feel the tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. The world felt distant and cold. She was alive, yes, but she didn't feel whole anymore. As the days passed, the pain began to fade, but the reality of her situation sank in. She would never look the same again. The world would never see her the same again. She couldn't hide it, couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. The patch would become part of her. And she hated it. At first, Sarah had refused to wear it. She didn't want to. She didn't want to acknowledge the hole that had been left in her life. But as time wore on, she realized that it wasn't just about the physical loss. It was about the way people looked at her. The whispers, the stares, the pity in their eyes, it was unbearable. The day she decided to wear the eye patch for the first time was the day everything changed. She put it on, tied it securely behind her head, and stepped out into the world again. She had hoped that people would stop staring, that they would move on. But instead, the stares only intensified. And yet, Sarah didn't let it break her. Her journey wasn't about what happened to her. It was about how she responded to it. She could either let this define her or rise above it. She chose the latter, but it wasn't easy. Now, sitting in class, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest as her classmates looked at her. The eye patch wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a constant reminder of everything she had survived. It wasn't just about losing her eye, it was about surviving something that should have taken her life. But no one ever asked about that. No one ever cared to know the real story. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and Sarah gathered her things, ready to leave. But as she stood up, a voice called out to her. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" It was Emily, the girl who sat behind her. Sarah turned to face her, startled. Emily had never spoken to her before, except for the usual polite greetings. This was different. She could see the curiosity in her eyes, but there was something more, a sense of urgency, as if Emily needed to know something. Sarah hesitated. She had never told anyone the full truth about what had happened. But maybe today, for the first time, she would. Maybe today, someone would finally understand. I don't know if I can tell you everything," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can tell you this much. The story behind this eye patch isn't what you think. And it's not just about losing an eye." Emily waited, her expression softening. "I think I'm ready to hear it," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She was about to share something that had been hidden for so long. Something that no one could have ever imagined. As the other students filed out of the classroom, Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. The secret that had shaped her life, the mystery she had carried with her for so long, was finally ready to come into the light. And the truth? The truth would shock them all. The air felt thick around Sarah as she stood in the quiet classroom, her words hanging in the silence after Emily's question. There was a moment of stillness, almost as if time had frozen. Emily's eyes were wide with curiosity, waiting, but Sarah couldn't help but hesitate. How much could she say? How much would Emily even believe? "Are you sure you want to hear this?" Sarah finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. She had barely told anyone the full story before, no one had ever asked, and she had never been brave enough to share it. But now, standing here with Emily, there was an odd sense of comfort. Something told her that Emily would listen, that she wouldn't judge her. Emily nodded. "I think I need to know. I've always wondered. I've seen you wear it for so long, and I don't know. I just think there's more to it. I won't judge you, I promise." Sarah breathed deeply. She could see the sincerity in Emily's eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of the eye patch lift, even if just for a moment. "It all started before the accident. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't some tragic story. I was just like everyone else, focused on school, friends, the usual teenage stuff." Sarah hesitated, looking out the window, her mind drifting back to those days. "I had a good life. But everything changed on one fateful day." Emily leaned in, clearly intrigued. "What happened?" Sarah swallowed hard. This was it, the moment where the past and present collided, where she would have to relive everything. She could already feel the old emotions swirling inside her, fear, anxiety, that sense of helplessness. But she had made a choice, hadn't she? A choice to stop hiding, to stop pretending the story didn't haunt her. I was 15, Sarah began, her voice steadying as she spoke. It was a Saturday, the kind of day where the sun is out and you don't have a care in the world. I was at home, hanging out with my little brother, Adam. He's the only one who really knew how much I loved to just relax on weekends. I didn't even know what was coming. I didn't know that life was about to turn upside down. Emily's eyes didn't leave her face, and Sarah appreciated the attention. The way Emily was listening made her feel like the story was worth telling, even if it was hard. Adam and I were playing in the backyard. Just typical kid stuff. I was helping him with his new bike. I was too old for it, of course, but I liked the idea of teaching him things. My mom was inside, and everything felt so normal, you know? Like, life was perfect. She paused, her mind replaying the sounds of that day. The laughter. The warmth of the sun. She hadn't known that it would all be shattered in an instant. I don't know why I didn't hear the car coming. I should have. I should have heard it, but I didn't. 1 second, I was on the porch, walking over to Adam to adjust his training wheels, and the next, everything was chaos. There was a screeching sound, like metal against metal, and then I felt something hit me. Hard. I remember being thrown, the force of it knocking the air out of me. Everything went black. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, swallowing down the lump in her throat. The memories rushed back, vivid and painful. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had no idea how much time had passed, but the first thing I noticed was the bandages around my head. I couldn't remember much. The accident had messed with my head. But there was this weird, overwhelming feeling of loss, like I knew something had been taken from me. Her voice wavered as she continued. The doctors told me that my right eye, it couldn't be saved. The trauma was too severe. They said I was lucky to be alive. But alive wasn't enough, not when I felt like half of me was missing. She stopped, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle in. Emily was silent, her face full of compassion but also shock. I didn't know how to deal with it at first. I remember just sitting there, feeling numb, like I couldn't connect to the world anymore. My family tried to comfort me, but what could they say? They couldn't take away the emptiness I felt. The loneliness. It was all so sudden, so unexpected. It wasn't supposed to be me. It wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah paused, pulling the eye patch back slightly, revealing the scar underneath. Emily's eyes flickered to it, but she didn't flinch. Sarah was grateful for that. I spent weeks in and out of surgeries. Trying to heal, trying to adjust. But the hardest part wasn't physical. It was the mental part. The constant barrage of stares. The pity in people's eyes. The whispers behind my back. I couldn't take it. I thought I could, but I couldn't. It was suffocating. Was that why you started wearing the patch? Emily asked, her voice softer now. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and strength. At first, I refused to wear it. I hated it. I didn't want to be defined by the accident, by the injury. But eventually, I realized that wearing it wasn't about hiding. It was about taking control of the story. It wasn't going to define me. I was going to define it. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath, the memory still vivid in her mind. It wasn't just the injury, Emily. It was everything that followed. The guilt I felt. I should have been more careful. I shouldn't have been out there. And then the worst part, the question I could never answer, why did it happen to me? Why did my life change forever, when others seemed so untouched? Sarah looked down, gathering her thoughts. But what no one knew was that it wasn't just an accident. It wasn't some random event. There were things that happened that day, things that no one could explain, that no one would ever believe. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. What do you mean? Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. This was the part she'd always kept buried. But she knew she had to tell it now. She couldn't keep it hidden any longer. That car wasn't supposed to be on our street. It wasn't even supposed to be driving that way. It had swerved off course, hitting me with an intensity that seemed almost too calculated. I know it sounds crazy, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that it wasn't just an accident. Someone was driving it, someone who knew what they were doing. Emily's eyes widened. Are you saying it wasn't an accident? I don't know what it was. But there were too many things that didn't add up, Sarah replied, her voice low, almost a whisper. The car came from nowhere. It was like it was aimed straight at me. And the driver never stopped. He didn't even slow down. They just kept going, disappearing into the night. The police couldn't find anything. No witnesses, no trace of the car. It was like it was meant to be erased. Emily looked stunned, unable to process what Sarah had just said. Sarah could see the confusion in her eyes, but she also saw something else, something that made her believe Emily would understand, even if the rest of the world wouldn't. I don't know who did it or why, but ever since that day, things have felt different. Like someone's been watching me. I feel like there's more to the story, something bigger than I can understand. But I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop wondering if someone, somewhere, was behind all of this. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the overhead lights. Emily didn't speak right away, her eyes searching Sarah's face for answers. But Sarah could see the questions in Emily's mind, the doubt, the curiosity. She wasn't sure what she was expecting from Emily, but she was relieved when Emily spoke up. I believe you. I don't know everything, but I believe you. And I think it's time we figure out the truth. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what the truth would be, but one thing was clear, she wasn't alone anymore. Emily was here. And together, maybe they could finally uncover what really happened that day. The following days after Sarah shared her story with Emily felt strange. For the first time in months, Sarah didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of the secret alone. She had expected to feel relief, but instead, a new kind of tension began to settle in. Now that she had told someone, now that Emily knew, things felt different. The conversation she had shared with Emily wasn't just an exchange of words, it was the beginning of something. Something bigger than herself. Something that had been waiting to come to light. For the first time in a long while, Sarah had an inkling that she wasn't just a victim of an accident. She was part of a story that involved more than just her struggle. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't add up. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Sarah knew that Emily wasn't going to let this go either. Something inside her told her that the search for answers was just beginning. The next day, as Sarah walked into school, her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't focus on the usual distractions. The whispers. The stares. They felt dull compared to the tension she felt inside. Emily had agreed to help her uncover the truth, and that decision felt like it was going to lead to something important. But what? Her thoughts drifted back to the night of the accident. The darkness, the screeching tires, and the sudden, terrifying feeling that she was being watched even before the car struck her. Something about that moment haunted her. It wasn't just a freak accident. It couldn't be. There had to be a reason why she, of all people, was caught in the path of that car. I'll be waiting for you at lunch, Emily's voice broke into Sarah's thoughts. She turned to face her friend, who was now walking beside her. Emily had a determined look on her face. It was the look of someone who wasn't going to let something go. Yeah, I'll be there, Sarah said, trying to sound casual, but inside, her heart was pounding. Today was the day. Emily had mentioned looking into something specific, something that could help them understand the whole accident better. At lunch, Emily was already waiting by their usual table. Sarah took a deep breath and sat down across from her. Emily wasted no time. I've been doing some digging, Emily began, her voice a little low, as if she didn't want anyone overhearing. I looked through the police reports, the ones from your accident. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get a copy. Sarah felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. Wait, what? How did you get those? Emily shrugged. I know a guy at the station. He owed me a favor. Anyway, I didn't get everything, but I found a few things. There's something off about the reports. Something that doesn't make sense. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Emily leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. The car, the one that hit you. The make and model, it was a match to a car registered to a company in the city. But here's the thing, the company was involved in a string of criminal activities. This wasn't just some random vehicle. Someone deliberately erased its identity, and I think it was done on purpose. Sarah felt like she had just been slapped. She stared at Emily, not sure how to process what she had just heard. A criminal company? What do you mean? Emily's eyes were wide with intensity. Exactly. The car was traced back to a logistics company that had been under investigation for trafficking, organized crime, and other illegal activities. The car was registered under the name of a man who disappeared shortly after the investigation began. He's off the grid, no one knows where he is. Sarah blinked, trying to wrap her mind around the information. That's insane. Are you saying that someone from that company hit me on purpose? Emily nodded slowly. I think so. But there's more. The guy who owns the car, his name, it sounds familiar. I'm not sure why yet, but it's something I need to look into. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was starting to sound less like an accident and more like an intentional act of violence. But why? Why would someone target her? She shook her head. This can't be real. This doesn't make any sense. I know it's hard to believe, Emily said, her voice softening, but it explains why there were no witnesses, why no one saw the car leave, why it seemed like the driver just disappeared. They covered their tracks, and now it's up to us to find out who did this. Who would want to hurt me, though? Sarah asked, her voice cracking. I don't understand. I'm just a normal person. Emily frowned. That's the question we need to answer. Just then, the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. The weight of what Emily had just shared settled heavily on Sarah. She stood up slowly, her mind reeling with the implications of what they had just uncovered. Sarah, Emily called, standing up too. We have to keep looking. I know it's scary, but we have to find out who's behind this. It's the only way to make sense of what happened. I know, Sarah said quietly. She was shaken, but there was a fire inside her now, something she hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something bigger. Someone out there had tried to take her life. And Sarah wasn't going to let them get away with it. A dangerous lead. The next few days passed in a blur. Every time Sarah thought about the investigation, her mind became a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and fear. But with Emily's determination, the truth seemed closer than ever. They had barely scratched the surface, but already, the pieces were starting to form a picture that didn't sit well with Sarah. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting too close to something dangerous. One evening, Emily called Sarah after school, her voice urgent. I think I've found something, she said quickly. It's about the man who disappeared, the one whose car hit you. Sarah's pulse quickened. What did you find? Emily hesitated for a moment. His name is David Hollis. And get this, he used to work for a high-profile business tycoon, someone with connections to some really shady deals. Sarah's stomach twisted. Who? I don't know yet, but I'm digging into it, Emily replied. I think we're getting closer. The next day, they met at the library after school, determined to follow this lead. The quiet atmosphere of the library felt almost like a safe haven compared to the storm raging in their minds. Emily spread out a collection of printouts and notes on the table, her face lit up with excitement. Okay, I found this article from a few years ago, she said, pulling out a newspaper clipping. David Hollis was mentioned in connection to a huge scandal involving a corporation. They were involved in illegal shipping routes, but Hollis disappeared right before the police could question him. Sarah felt her heart drop. And the car he was driving, that's connected to all of this? Emily nodded. I think so. The police report mentioned that the car was registered to a shell company owned by a larger entity, and I think David Hollis is involved in something far bigger than we imagined. Sarah stared at the papers, her mind spinning. This is too much. I don't know how to take all of this in. Why would someone like Hollis target me? I don't know, Emily said quietly. But I think we're getting closer. We need to dig deeper, Sarah. We need to find out what Hollis was involved in, and who's still pulling the strings. As the days passed, Sarah felt like she was getting closer to something that she couldn't fully comprehend. The web of lies and secrets seemed to grow with every new piece of information they uncovered. But one thing was clear, whoever was behind this didn't want the truth to come out. And Sarah was determined to find out what really happened, no matter the cost. The days that followed felt surreal. Every waking moment seemed like a blur of investigation, digging through documents, piecing together the fragmented story that Sarah had never truly understood. But as the pieces clicked together, they revealed something far darker than she had ever imagined. Emily and Sarah were getting closer to the truth. But every new revelation came with a price, questions that led to even more questions. Questions that began to feel like traps. The pressure of it all was starting to weigh on Sarah's shoulders. She could feel the eyes on her more now. The whispers had started again. People who had barely given her a second glance before were suddenly watching her, talking behind her back, their curious glances feeling more like judgment than concern. It was as though the accident that had once made her an outcast was now a point of fascination, a strange and disturbing thing to be gawked at. But Sarah had stopped caring about the whispers. She had bigger things to worry about now. The investigation had uncovered too much for her to turn back. There was no going back to the way things had been before. She could feel it in her gut. They were being watched. The hidden network. Emily's discovery about David Hollis had opened up a Pandora's box of information. The more they dug, the more they uncovered about the criminal network he had been tied to. The illegal shipping routes, the shell companies, the shady figures involved, everything was connected. But no one seemed to know where Hollis had gone. He had vanished without a trace. And Sarah? She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. That the car that had hit her wasn't just a random act of violence, but a deliberate move in a much larger game. She met Emily at the local cafe that afternoon, the place where they'd spent countless hours over the past few weeks, poring over documents, cross-referencing names, and following the trail wherever it led. I found something new, Emily said, her voice low and urgent. She slid a file across the table to Sarah. I managed to get my hands on a confidential report. It's about Hollis. Sarah opened the file, scanning the pages quickly. The name David Hollis appeared again, but this time, there was something more specific, a date, a meeting, a location. He was seen here, Sarah said, pointing to the address on the page. It's a warehouse just outside the city. Emily nodded. That's where things get interesting. I found out that he was meeting with someone. Someone connected to the criminal organization. And get this meeting happened just a few days before your accident. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. You think the meeting had something to do with me? I think it's possible, Emily said. What if you were part of something bigger than we've been led to believe? What if Hollis knew something about you? Or maybe he was involved in something that put you in his path? I don't know, Sarah said, her mind racing. But we need to find out more about that warehouse. We need to go there. Emily hesitated, her eyes narrowing. I don't know if we should. What if it's dangerous? We don't know who's still involved with Hollis or what kind of people we're dealing with. But Sarah felt a sense of determination welling up inside her. The answers were out there, and she couldn't stop now. She had come this far, and the thought of not knowing what happened, not knowing why her life had been torn apart, was unbearable. "We have to go," Sarah said. "We have to see what's really going on. I can't live with not knowing." The warehouse. The drive to the warehouse felt like an eternity. The air was thick with tension, and every moment seemed to stretch longer than the last. Emily had reluctantly agreed to come with her, but both of them knew this wasn't going to be an easy task. They were about to step into the unknown, into a world that neither of them fully understood. But Sarah had no choice. She needed answers. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a maze of dark streets and abandoned buildings. The further they drove, the more isolated the area seemed. As they approached the warehouse, Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was where everything was supposed to come together, or fall apart. The building stood like a shadow in the distance, a dark and imposing structure that seemed to swallow the light around it. The windows were boarded up, and the door was a heavy metal slab. It looked like no one had been here in years. "Are you sure this is the place?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Sarah nodded. "This is it. The report said he was here. And if Hollis was meeting with someone, they could have left something behind. Something that tells us what's really going on." They parked a few blocks away and approached the warehouse on foot, moving cautiously through the darkened streets. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of wind through the trees. It all felt like it was closing in on them. They reached the entrance of the warehouse, where Sarah hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the cold metal door. "I don't know if we should be doing this," Emily whispered, looking around nervously. "We could be walking straight into trouble. We don't know what's inside." "I know," Sarah said. "But we need to know the truth. We can't stop now." She pushed open the door, the heavy metal creaking in protest as they stepped inside. The warehouse was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of old wood and rust. The space was vast, stretching out before them like a cavern. Boxes were stacked high, crates were piled up in corners, and the faint outline of old machinery could be seen in the shadows. "This place is creepy," Emily muttered, her voice barely audible. Sarah nodded. "Stay close." They moved cautiously through the warehouse, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The deeper they went, the more uneasy Sarah felt. There was something about the place that felt wrong, like they weren't supposed to be here. It wasn't just the eeriness of the building, it was the feeling that someone was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Suddenly, Sarah's foot caught on something, sending her stumbling forward. She braced herself against a crate to keep from falling, her heart racing. "What is it?" Emily asked, rushing to her side. Sarah looked down. Beneath the crate, partially obscured by dust, was a small metal box. She knelt down and reached for it, her fingers brushing against its cold surface. Slowly, she lifted the box and opened it. Inside, there were papers, pages upon pages of notes, photos, and documents. Sarah spread them out on the floor, her mind racing as she scanned the contents. There were photographs of the warehouse, pictures that had been taken just days before the accident. There were also names. And one name stood out above the rest, David Hollis. But it wasn't just Hollis's name that caught her attention. It was the names surrounding his, names she recognized from the criminal network Emily had uncovered. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "This is the evidence we've been looking for." The photos were incriminating, showing meetings, exchanges of money, and even images of people Sarah had seen in the police reports, people connected to illegal activities. But there was one final photo that made Sarah freeze. It was a photo of Sarah herself, taken on the night of the accident. The date on the back of the photo matched the night she had been hit. "Emily," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just an accident. This is part of something much bigger. Someone's been watching me." They knew I was going to be in the path of that car. Emily's eyes widened in shock. But why? Why would they target you? Sarah felt a sense of dread rise in her chest as she stared at the photo. She didn't have the answer yet, but one thing was clear: they were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. And whatever they found next, it wasn't going to be easy. The warehouse had been a turning point. What had begun as a simple investigation into a mysterious accident had now spiraled into a full-blown quest for answers. The deeper Sarah and Emily dug, the more they uncovered about the web of deceit, the hidden criminal network, and the unsettling truth about why Sarah had been targeted. But even as they closed in on the truth, a sense of foreboding hung over them. The more they learned, the more dangerous the world around them became. It was early evening when Sarah found herself sitting in the quiet of her bedroom, going over the evidence they had discovered. The box from the warehouse sat open in front of her, the documents and photos spread out across the bed. She could feel her pulse quickening as she looked at the photo of herself, taken just hours before the accident. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Someone had planned it. The crash wasn't just an accident, it was orchestrated. And now, whoever was behind it knew she was getting closer to the truth. The documents in the box were damning. Names, dates, locations. Everything pointed to a larger, more dangerous conspiracy than she had ever imagined. And yet, amidst all the names she recognized, there was one that stood out, one that made her blood run cold. It was a name she had never expected to see: Lucas Dawson. Sarah stared at the name. Lucas Dawson had been a figure in her life years ago, a fleeting acquaintance from her past, someone she had met only a handful of times. He was always quiet, charming, and harmless, or so she had thought. His name had never seemed significant, until now. Lucas, what does he have to do with all of this? She whispered to herself. It was then that she realized the horrible truth: Lucas was involved in the same criminal network that had orchestrated the accident. But why? Why would someone like Lucas, someone she had trusted, be mixed up in such dangerous dealings? She picked up her phone and texted Emily. "We need to talk. I just found something big." A few minutes later, Emily replied. "I'm on my way." The revelation. When Emily arrived, Sarah wasted no time. She quickly explained what she had found: Lucas Dawson's name among the criminals involved in the conspiracy. Emily looked at the documents in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," Emily said, her voice sharp with shock. "Lucas? But why would he be in the middle of all this? He was always so normal." Sarah shook her head, still trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know. That's the part that doesn't make sense. He was always so quiet, so unassuming. But he's in these documents. And if he's involved, then maybe he's been a part of the plan all along." Emily's brow furrowed as she looked over the papers. If Lucas is really part of this network, it means everything we've found so far is connected. There's something bigger going on here. Something that could involve a lot more people than we think. Sarah stood up, pacing around her room as she tried to piece the puzzle together. "We need to find out what Lucas knows. If he's involved, he might have answers. We need to confront him." Emily looked uneasy. "Confront him? Sarah, do you realize how dangerous that could be? If Lucas is connected to these people, we have no idea what he's capable of. He might have been hiding in plain sight this whole time." "I don't care," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "I need answers. We can't just sit here and let this go." They both knew the risks, but the pull of the truth was too strong to ignore. Emily agreed reluctantly, though both of them knew that confronting Lucas would be dangerous. The deeper they went, the more dangerous the game became. But Sarah couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The confrontation. It wasn't long before they tracked Lucas down. He had moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as they pulled up in front of the building. This was it, the moment when everything could change. Either they would get the answers they needed, or they would walk right into the hands of those who had been pulling the strings all along. Emily hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah nodded. "I have to be. I need to know why. I need to know why my life was thrown into chaos." They walked up to Lucas's apartment door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest, her thoughts racing. She had no idea what to expect, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. They had come too far. Emily knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the hallway. A few seconds later, Lucas opened the door. His eyes widened in surprise as he took in the sight of Sarah and Emily standing in front of him. "What are you two doing here?" Lucas asked, his voice guarded. Sarah didn't waste any time. "We know what you're involved in, Lucas. We know about the criminal network, about the accident. Why did you have me targeted?" Lucas's face went pale, and for a split second, Sarah saw something in his eyes, something that flickered like guilt, like fear. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He stepped back, motioning for them to come inside. "Let's talk," he said, his voice low. They entered the apartment cautiously. The space was small and sparsely furnished. There was a lingering tension in the air, as if something was about to break. "Sit down," Lucas said, pointing to the couch. "We can talk, but you need to understand, I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Then why were you involved? Why was I targeted?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't have a choice. None of us did." "None of you?" Emily asked, her voice sharp. "Who else is involved?" Lucas hesitated, looking like he was weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know the full extent of what was going on until it was too late. I was brought in by someone I thought I could trust. But I was wrong. They made sure I did what they wanted. I didn't think they'd go this far. I thought it was just a small part of something bigger, but I was wrong." Sarah leaned forward, her voice cold. "Who are they? Who's behind this?" Lucas's gaze shifted nervously. "I can't tell you that. It's too dangerous. If I say anything, they'll kill me. They'll kill you. They'll kill all of us." The weight of his words sank in, the danger suddenly feeling more real than ever before. Emily stood up, her face pale. "We're already in this deep, Lucas. You need to tell us who's behind all of this. Who set it up?" Lucas looked down, visibly shaken. I can't say any more. They'll find out." Just then, the sound of tires screeching outside the apartment caught their attention. A car had pulled up outside, and from the sound of it, whoever it was wasn't here for a friendly chat. "Damn it," Lucas muttered under his breath, his eyes widening in panic. "They're here." Suddenly, the door to the apartment flew open, and in walked two men, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses. They were tall, intimidating, and carried an air of menace that made Sarah's stomach drop. "It's too late," one of them said coldly. "You shouldn't have come here." The men were moving fast, and in the blink of an eye, they had Sarah and Emily cornered. They didn't have much time to react before they were grabbed by the shoulders, pushed toward the door, and forced into the hallway. The apartment door slammed shut behind them, leaving them trapped in the hallway with no escape in sight. "Let's go," one of the men said, his voice low and threatening. "You're coming with us." As they were shoved down the stairs, Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't just a simple confrontation anymore. They had walked right into the heart of the conspiracy, and now there was no turning back. The cold wind of the night air stung Sarah's face as she and Emily were shoved into the back of the black van. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the sound of the engine starting up sent a cold shiver through Sarah's body. She glanced at Emily, who looked just as terrified, her face pale in the dim light filtering in from the small window. The two men who had taken them were silent, their eyes unblinking, as though they had done this 1,000 times before. They wore dark suits, their faces expressionless, and their presence was suffocating. Sarah's heart raced in her chest, her mind spinning with questions. Who were these people? What did they want with her and Emily? And why was Lucas so afraid of them? But even as the questions swirled in her head, a part of her knew that she wasn't going to get answers until it was too late. The van drove for what felt like hours. The landscape blurred outside the small window, and Sarah felt as though she was drifting, lost in a sea of uncertainty. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, and she could feel her anxiety creeping higher with every passing minute. Finally, the van came to a stop. The two men exchanged brief words before one of them got out and opened the door. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as they were roughly pulled out of the van and pushed toward a nearby building. It was an industrial area, empty, desolate, and quiet. The man in front of them gestured for them to follow him. Move. Sarah's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to keep walking. The cold concrete beneath her feet felt like ice, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She had no idea where they were taking them, but she knew this wasn't good. The building they entered was just as cold and impersonal as the surroundings. It was dark, with only a few flickering lights casting long shadows on the walls. They were led down a narrow corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Every turn felt like a step deeper into the unknown, and Sarah could feel the weight of the situation settling into her bones. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but there was no way out now. They had come too far. At the end of the hallway, the man knocked twice on a door. A voice from inside called out, muffled and distant. The man opened the door and motioned for Sarah and Emily to enter. Inside the room, the air was thick with tension. A large desk sat in the center, with a man behind it. His face was hidden in shadow, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her. She recognized him immediately. David Hollis. The man who had vanished. The one who had been connected to the network. The one who had orchestrated the accident that had changed her life forever. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This was it. This was the man who had been pulling the strings all along. He sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he studied her with an unsettling calm. Well, he said, his voice smooth and low. The survivors. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. You're behind all of this? Hollis smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not behind it, Miss Carter. I'm just a small part of a much larger picture. You see, what you've stumbled upon isn't just an accident. It's an opportunity. Emily shot Sarah a nervous glance, her voice trembling. What do you mean? Why did you target her? Why was she hit by that car? Hollis leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You've been asking the wrong questions, my dear. It's not about Sarah being hit by a car. It's about what she represents. You see, the real power isn't in the people who make things happen, it's in the ones who can survive them. Sarah's confusion deepened, but she didn't speak. She wanted answers. She needed answers. Hollis continued, as though he was savoring the moment. I'm not some random villain you can take down. No. What you don't understand is that everything you've uncovered, the warehouse, the files, the names, they were all meant to lead you here. To me. Emily's voice rose in panic. What do you want with us? Why do you want Sarah? Hollis chuckled softly. You're not understanding, Emily. I don't want Sarah. I need her. The truth unfolds. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the blood draining from her face as Hollis continued speaking, his words echoing in the cold, sterile room. I needed someone to survive, he said, his eyes cold and calculating. Sarah was the perfect candidate. She was never supposed to get hurt. But when she did, it changed everything. She survived an accident no one expected her to survive. And that's what makes her so valuable. Sarah's mind was racing. I don't understand. Why? What's so special about me? Hollis leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. It's simple, really. The people I work for, they have a particular interest in survivors, people who have been through something traumatic and lived to tell the tale. People like you, Sarah, have a certain resilience. A strength that can be harnessed. You're not just a pawn in a game. You're part of something bigger. Something that could change everything. Emily looked from Sarah to Hollis, her expression one of confusion and fear. This is insane. What are you talking about? What do you want with her? What's the point of all this? Hollis's smile widened, though it was anything but reassuring. I've said it before, it's not about what you know. It's about what you can survive. The truth is, Sarah, you've been marked for something. You've been chosen. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had never thought of herself as special, never thought that anything about her would be of interest to someone like Hollis. But the more he spoke, the more it all began to make a twisted kind of sense. But why? Why had she been chosen? What did she have that they wanted? Hollis stood up, his movements deliberate and calm. You can't escape the path that's been laid out for you. You're a part of something bigger than you understand, Sarah. And now, it's time to accept your role in this. The escape. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the hallway. A series of muffled voices echoed through the walls, followed by the sound of footsteps growing closer. The door to the room flew open, and a man dressed in black rushed inside, his face tense with urgency. Mr. Hollis, we've got a problem, the man said, his voice strained. They've found us. The authorities. They're closing in. Hollis's expression darkened. I see. He turned to Sarah and Emily, his cold gaze locking onto them. It seems our time is up. But don't think this is over. The man who had entered the room grabbed Sarah and Emily by the arms, pulling them roughly toward the door. But as they were being dragged out, Sarah saw something in the corner of the room that made her heart skip a beat, a small button on the wall, hidden behind a desk. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Sarah pushed Emily aside and ran toward the button, slamming her hand against it. The room seemed to shift, and the walls began to tremble. Hollis's face twisted with rage as the ground beneath them started to shake. No, he yelled. You don't know what you've done. Before Sarah could react, a hidden door slid open in the wall, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. Without thinking, she grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her into the tunnel, just as the building seemed to erupt behind them. The escape continues. They ran through the tunnel, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The sound of gunfire and shouting faded as they moved deeper into the darkness. The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Finally, they emerged into the night air, breathless and shaken. Sarah looked around, disoriented, but the dark city skyline offered no comfort. They were free for now, but they knew they couldn't stay. Hollis and his people would be looking for them. They didn't know where they were going, but for the first time in a long time, they felt a sense of hope. They had survived. They had escaped. And now, they had the truth. But there was still so much more to uncover. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, Sarah knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Sarah and Emily uncover the chilling truth behind the conspiracy, learning that Sarah had been chosen for her survival, making her a key piece in a much larger and more dangerous game. However, their escape from Hollis marks a new chapter in their fight for the truth and their survival, leaving the door open for more revelations in the future. The story ends with a feeling of both closure and anticipation for what lies ahead.